प्राउड वोटर कहलाऊंगी, पूरे देश संग चुनाव का पर्व मनाऊंगी।
Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on India's national television channel Doordarshan about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations and regional and global developments that have an impact on India's rise. Viewers, in this episode we are looking at a seminal contest that's happening in the South China Sea between China and the Philippines. Why is this conflict intensifying in the maritime domain? What are its repercussions for regional order and security and for world order? And what can be done to ensure a rules-based regional and world order? This is the question we are asking in this show and trying to explore. To discuss this, I have two domain experts who are joining me to take us through. Let me introduce you to them. Firstly, I have with me Dr. Pooja Bhatt, who is a noted commentator and writer on Indo-Pacific issues. She is a visiting fellow at the Center for Air Power Studies think tank and a former consultant with the Ministry of External Affairs. Dr. Bhatt, welcome to Indian Diplomacy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here discussing with you.
And secondly, I have with me Dr. Premesha Saha, who is a fellow at the Observer Research Foundation and presently joining us from Japan. She's on a research fellowship with the Japan Foundation. Dr. Saha, welcome to Indian Diplomacy.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So coming to you first, Dr. Bhatt, you have been tracking Indo-Pacific matters since this construct has emerged over a decade ago. But the tensions and the confrontations and the skirmishes that we are seeing now between China and the Philippines seem to be at the highest point in a long time. So the first question that comes to mind is, why is it happening now? Why are the Chinese upping the ante and stepping on the accelerator and trying to apply so much pressure, military pressure, to try and browbeat a small and weak country like the Philippines? And what is the Chinese mindset right now in the current juncture that's pushing them in this direction?
Excellent question. To start with the current scenario that is happening, we have to take it back a few years since 1990s. So the entire dispute between China and Philippines on the South China Sea is not new. Something started in 1990s. Yeah. So since then they have been having these issues about the Scarborough Shoal and the Second Thomas Shoal, that the two areas which are under dispute in South China Sea. And since then China has been trying to manage it out with Philippine government. What happens in 1990s, it had a little more pro Chinese government favoring ruling government in Philippines, so it could manage it out. Now again we have a new president in Philippines, Marcos Jr., and he is more again less favoring China and favoring US more, and he is using this current scenario of South China Sea in building its engagement. So we see a Philippines that sees its maritime security very crucial, and they're trying to build their relationships with other countries. Recently we have this trilateral summit between US, Japan and Philippines. Yeah. So these are the other ways of how Philippines is trying to react to the entire Chinese pressure. The question to which why China is doing it, yeah. We see Xi Jinping in his third term. His entire legacy in third term was bringing his old glory of China back. It's so the case in Taiwan, the case in Philippines, it's all his election agenda of bringing that old glory about China back. Is he's trying to work it through those imperialistic expansions that he's trying to do. So these are mixtures of domestic and international reactions that we are seeing in South China Sea, given the fact US has again added to the entire South China Sea dimensions, where they have more presence in South China Sea. They are doing more exercises in South China Sea. So there are a lot of combination of domestic and international factors which we are seeing in South China Sea right now.
Right. So yeah, the changes in government in the Philippines do matter, and the Chinese become more aggressive when they perceive that the regime in the Philippines is more hostile to them. Let me bring in Dr. Premesha Saha. Dr. Saha, you are a Southeast Asia expert and have been following this very closely and writing about it. The Philippines, what is its strategy as it now faces this giant which is trying to bully and browbeat it. Every day you hear of incidents in the maritime spaces where the Chinese are shooting water cannons or interjecting between Philippine vessels that are trying to reach their legitimate territories, trying to blockade the Philippines from areas that they claim, and essentially using their maritime might, to try and establish a new fait accompli and to eject the Philippines from these spaces. So if you are the Philippines and you're small, what are your options now? Because Dr. Bhatt was saying that an earlier regime tried to appease the Chinese, and still the Chinese did not relent and give up their claims. And now Ferdinand Marcos Jr., we had the Philippine Foreign Secretary on Indian diplomacy some months ago, and he was also talking about rules-based order at stake. Now under this current regime, they are taking a more confrontational path. But either way, the Chinese don't give up and relent. And so what do you do if you're a small country and you are, your very existence and survival is at stake?
Yeah. So currently, as you very rightly pointed out, the Philippines, the change in government, the present government is very pro-US and contrary to the previous one. And I think the main thing that Philippines is trying to do is there is a realization that ASEAN in a way is limited when it comes to dealing with the South China Sea issue, because you can clearly see that there is a division within the ASEAN in terms of how the claimants want to deal with the dispute and how the non-claimants, and some of these non-claimants like Cambodia, Laos are very closely, they have very close ties to China. So in those regards, Philippines has, sometimes you can see that if you read the Philippines media reports, you can find that even Philippines have suggested that whether they are trying to come up with solutions which just not just limit within the walls of ASEAN. This is not a solution in a way, but they are trying to balance the situation. They're trying to present like a balance of power when it comes to South China Sea issue, because as you clearly mentioned, it is a very small island nation, right? And currently they are entering into the minilateral format that the Indo-Pacific is well known for. You can see with US, with Japan, they had the military exercises, naval exercises with Australia, US, Japan as well on 7th of April.
Yeah, they call it the so-called East Asian Quad.
Yes.
Philippines, US, Japan, Australia. India is part of the main quad, but then there is the Philippines now part of this new quad.
This quad. Yes, they are not calling it as a quad, because again, when you call it the quad, again the ASEAN centrality question comes into the picture. They are calling it more like a minilateral, a collective maritime partnership. That is how they are branding it as. So currently the aim is to diversify their partnerships, reach out to as many partners in the Indo-Pacific as possible, and they are doing it differently. With India, the approach is a little different. With India, the focus right now is strengthening the defense and security partnership. With US, they are already a security ally, intensifying that partnership, as you could see by the updation of the enhancement defense agreement that they have. So there are ways, and even trying to come up with a reciprocal basis agreement with Japan by the end of the year. So they are trying to work with as many partners as possible, trying to balance out this with China, and also in a way they are I don't know if they're choosing sides when it comes to great power competition, but to them, the South China Sea agenda, they're just trying to diversify and work with as many partners in different ways as possible.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, now they are in a counterbalancing kind of a mode, Dr. Bhatt. The bandwagoning, as we call it, which is to kowtow and to submit, that is certainly not on the cards for the Philippines under this administration of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Now, the number one ally of the Philippines has always been the United States. Let's look at the US strategy. President Biden says that there is an ironclad commitment of the US for the security of the Philippines, and the Pentagon has clarified that if China attacks to the point where it leads to deaths or causes physical injury and loss of Philippine naval personnel, then they are treaty bound to come to the assistance of the Philippines and to actually fight for the Philippines. But then always people doubt whether the US would be willing to really risk an all-out confrontation or even a limited confrontation or a clash with China. They have their own so-called freedom of navigation operations and all those things in the region, and sometimes I believe they are watching close by in some reefs, not far away from where the Philippines-China confrontation is happening. There's a US warship not far away and trying to send the signal, but still, so far it has not deterred the Chinese, and they are just going ahead with their, my way or the highway kind of an approach. So, what do you think is the US effect here? I mean, are Biden's assurances of ironclad commitments enough?
That's a very good question again. First of all, if we see from the US side that their engagement in the whether they are able to deliver on their commitments to its partners and allies, it is doubtful. And I think any pragmatic nation at the moment will realize that US is diversified when it comes to its resources, when it comes to its forces, internal its own politics, Republicans versus Democrats, which are not supporting the wars anymore. So I think every other country realizes that despite all the assurances that US is trying to provide to the rest of the world, that we are there and we are your treaty ally, we'll come and support you, I think countries realize the limits of US cooperation. Having said that, how US I would see, and the kind trajectory that I would expect the US would be helping out Philippines would be mostly through the supply of weapons, defense supplies, intelligence sharing, which is the most important. So I think that is a kind of factor.
Track the Chinese submarines and the vessels and their movement,
which is not
the maritime militia and all that.
Correct.
The Americans have the capabilities.
Yes, they have the capability which Philippines does not have. And MDA is right now, maritime domain awareness is the biggest factor right now in the maritime. To fight a maritime related war, anything in Navy, you need that kind of support. US can support the Philippines on that. So I think Philippines very well clearly knows that what are the limits and scope of US involvement in the region, how it can support it. It's very well using that support. Treaty alliance is there, as you rightly mentioned. Since 1950s they have this mutual defense agreement which US can use at any time. They have reflected on EDCA, the enhanced defense cooperation agreement recently.
They have more US military presence and bases.
Yeah, they have opened 5 new bases on the northern part of Philippines. I think so that is how US is trying to provide all the kind of support that it could. At the same time, Philippines is being very wise in diversifying its own cards as well. So the recent trade, that defense trade that you're seeing, it's just not the US that is a defense partner to Philippines anymore. India is supplying. We supplied BrahMos recently. Australia is supplying drones. France is supplying drones. I think Germany is supplying some Coast Guard vessels to them.
Dr. Saha, there are other claimants with China contesting China's so-called 9- or 10- line, and there's Vietnam, we have Taiwan, we have Malaysia, and Brunei as well. And but we don't hear as much of clashes and confrontations. At least they try to keep it a little more low profile when it comes to their disputes with China. Of course, Taiwan is always in the news because of a different reason, not because of South China Sea dispute, but because of the direct threat of Chinese occupation and invasion or so-called reunification of Taiwan. But most of the others, if you take Vietnam for example, you have been studying Vietnam as well, they tend to be a little more cagey about quote-unquote provoking China, although they also have major claims and disputes with the Chinese. So how would you compare the Philippine approach to defending their sovereignty and their rights in the maritime domain compared to, say, a Vietnam?
Firstly, what needs to be understood is that Southeast Asia is in general a very diverse region, not only in terms of culture, in terms of foreign policy orientation. And right now, I mean, if you look at how the Southeast Asian scholars are even approaching the issue, you would see that there is a divided approach. Some very clearly understand that where the Philippines is coming from. As you rightly mentioned, that right now what is happening in the Philippines claimed waters or the disputed side, that is much more in the news rather than what is happening with the others at the moment. The rest of Southeast Asia, barring the Philippines currently, when it comes to Vietnam, it comes to Indonesia, Malaysia, they are clearly adopting a hedging strategy. They are clearly not choosing any sides here. They are not being as bold as the Philippines. what the Philippines is doing, it cannot be considered as a general approach also. It cannot be looked at as that is what, Southeast Asians, if they are in a way understanding where the Philippines is coming from, but even when you look at the government officials, they are also quite skeptical about what the Philippines is doing and whether that can lead to a outright confrontation in the South China Sea. That is one of their primary concerns. You spoke about Vietnam, but you can see that Biden was visiting Vietnam. He visited the Communist Party offices, and just days after, there was also a visit from China. So they are clearly, keeping both their options on the table, and that is how. But Philippines is very much acting, their policy very much spells out anti-China at the moment. So it makes it clear, that's why China knows that its cards are playing right when it comes to the other Southeast Asian partners. Its influence is still there. But given in the Philippines its influence is waning, its importance is waning, it's acting out more in the second Thomas Shoal than in the other contested waters.
Yeah. Dr. Bhatt, the Philippines is standing out right now and is taking a lot of heat and a lot of pressure from the Chinese. But being conciliatory has also not helped them. That's the point, right? It's a dilemma. It's a catch-22 for them. Under Duterte, it didn't work out for them because the Chinese continue to push and be aggressive. So now there is a Taiwan question also, which is closely linked to the Philippines and Japan. Now we just saw this summit, this unusual summit between the US, Japan, and the Philippines. And there they not only spoke about defending the Philippine sovereignty and territorial integrity, but also the question of defending Taiwan, which is one of the claimants to South China Sea dispute, but more importantly is fighting for its existence, its very existence, against being swallowed up by China. So given the geographical proximity, both Japan and the Philippines will be very critical, right, for the defense of Taiwan. And this summit suggests that they are closing ranks. Somebody has called it like a lattice work diplomacy, where the friends of the US are also coming together to try and defend key positions and key countries and territories. So the Taiwan question in a way is now entangled with this because the Philippines and Taiwan are so close by. So with the new administration in Taiwan, which is quite stridently opposed to Chinese imperialism and colonialism, there is likelihood that the Taiwan dispute will also keep on getting amplified, right? Because the Chinese seem to be saying that you either are submissive and kowtow before us. If you dare to stand up, we are going to try and bully you or try and teach you a lesson. So the Taiwan question linked to the Philippines question and to the South Chinese, these two are now becoming one integrated problem, not two separate ones, right? And that's why we have an integrated construct of Indo-Pacific. So can you talk a little bit about the Taiwan issue, and now what is the likelihood of more tensions there, and how do you think the Taiwan will be able to defend itself? Will it have to follow the same Philippine approach, or will it have to use some other means?
See, in terms of Taiwan, it is a crucial factor for Xi Jinping's third term. His entire, as I earlier mentioned, his entire propaganda about third term was it will get back the Taiwan into Chinese fold. And with that kind of election agenda, he had won this election. So it's very prominent for him to get Taiwan, to get control over Taiwan. Whether it's the political control, whether it's territorial control, we need to still figure it out how he would want to control it, because it also knows the importance of Taiwan in terms of geopolitical backlash it will get, because Taiwan by now, even though it does not have more than 5, 6 or 8, I think, international countries who are giving international recognition, but otherwise if you see, Taiwan has way more recognition internationally. So informally. So I think China very well knows the moment, and every time it's upping its ante on Taiwan, more attention, more support Taiwan is getting. So China very well understands that dynamics, that more it will pressurize the Taiwanese factor. It will get backlash. But at the same time, the how Philippines has gotten this entire issue into till now, till 2012, I would say the Philippines issue in the South China Sea was not very prominent. We were not looking at Philippines South China Sea issue. International gaze was not in it. what exactly happened in past these 10 years? Philippines actually started promoting it as an international issue. It started bringing more media personnel on its boats, giving more media attention, so that the issue of South China Sea is no more a regional issue, it becomes an international issue. And that's what got its support. So it was for Philippines, it was a very domestic issue or a regional issue. Now entire world is interested in it. So that is how I would see Philippines has worked itself up in terms of international levels and got this support for South China Sea, Thomas Shoal. When we compare the Taiwanese politics and Philippines politics, we cannot compare, as Premesha also mentioned, because all these countries have different relationships with China.
Yeah.
So how they are trying to play it out with China, Philippines is diversifying its relationship. Vietnamese on the other hand, and some other countries are basically hedging from China. Taiwan, on the other hand, are trying to get again more US support and more international support. So I think each of these countries are playing their games very differently at individual level, but collectively, if you see, they are all opposing Chinese imperialistic ambitions, as you said.
Right, that's well said. Yeah, collectively there is a sentiment that we cannot allow this schoolyard bully to rule the roost, and that viewers, we are seeing more and more sentiment that China cannot be allowed to get away. Let me go back to Dr. Saha. Dr. Saha, India is not a bystander. We are not just silently watching. Our Indo-Pacific strategy frequently mentions rule of law in the South China Sea. Our bilateral statements with the US have also spoken about high concern about freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, and increasingly our Navy is also making a presence in that region, and we already spoke about the BrahMos supersonic anti-ship missiles that India is providing to the Philippines and has been willing to provide to other players in the region, although they have not worked out the logistics. So for us, the stakes are, what happens there is not just something that is distant and far away, but it will have ripple effects, because if, as a matter of principle, if a bigger power is allowed to get away with murder there, it is going to come after us as well, and we already have a big confrontation with them in this region. So how would you analyze India's role and perception to this, this volcanic situation that we are seeing in the South China Sea, and what have we done so far, and what more can we do?
So if you see India's approach, a shift is very clearly visible. Even before, look at these recent two visits of External Affairs Dr. Jaishankar to Manila, Philippines. And statements, if you follow the statements, the chronology of statements, say in 2012 and stuff, we used to come up with very generic statements which mostly all countries who were not ex-party to the South China Sea dispute used to come up with, that freedom of navigation has to be maintained, the dispute has to be settled as per the provisions of UNCLOS, the law of the sea. Now if you see the Indian statements, it has become firmer, it has become bolder in terms of, outrightly the 2016 ruling. We've just started referring to that in our statements, especially in the last two visits to Philippines, that India, wants to support the Philippines in its fight towards territorial integrity, and that it stands by the 2016 ruling. These kind of statements were not made before. So in terms of statements, in terms of making clear that India also is now more concerned, and Indian foreign policy is now becoming more proactive, we are trying to become the leading voice in the global south. In that way, our statements have undergone a transformation. In terms of steps, defense and security partnership, India had been trying to make inroads, but as you said, BrahMos deals with Vietnam, Indonesia has not worked out in the past. With Philippines, it has worked out. If we can strike similar deals with other countries, then I think the fact that India is trying to emerge as a security and defense partner, it has to sustain that by entering into similar deals with other countries. But in terms of this, and we have been doing naval exercises, CORPAT exercises, for example, coordinated patrols. Our naval war colleges have hosted training programs for naval officers from Southeast Asian countries. The Coast Guard, right now the Coast Guard ship had also visited Philippines. All that is happening. We are taking it, we are not being as bold, say, as the US, Australia and Japan at the moment, but we are taking it step at a time. and our policies is transforming. If you just go back to the 2017 Quad meeting which happened, India was the only among the four which did not comment on the South China Sea issue when the thing was happening. But now India is much firmer. India is taking bolder stance. So our our policies are undergoing a transformation. It will take some time for India to be seen by the region as a whole as a strategic and defense partner. But we have actually at least started making fresh inroads in that direction. And in terms of what more India can do, as I said, it has to work in a similar way. Similar attention has to be given to other countries in the region as well, because just striking a deal with the Philippines will not give away that impression that Southeast Asia as a region in total is viewing India as a strategic player. So it has to pay similar attention and that way strike more defense deals and enter into more exercises with other countries as well.
Right. So we are net security provider in the Indian Ocean region, but east of the Strait of Malacca, we are slowly making inroads and a presence and partnering in a meaningful way, in a very concrete way with the key players, and we need to do more. Last word, Dr. Bhatt. This South China Sea dispute is not going away, and it's likely to escalate. And if there is more, pressure on smaller countries in that region, they must be defended. And I think that's our ultimate viewpoint here in India. And we are going to try and do whatever we can, given that we have IOR, the Indian Ocean is a primary responsibility, but even in the South China Sea. So going forward, Indian policy in the region, your assessment, and what is the, how do we have to strategize in the event of armed conflict over Taiwan or the Philippines? What is in it for us, and how do we strategize going forward?
Okay, one thing we have to keep it very clear that no country will fight other countries' war. No country, not even US. So in keeping that in mind, what best we can do is support those countries with the right kind of infrastructure, right kind of training, right kind of equipments, right kind of information, which US is trying to do, but it has its own limitations. And this is where India also steps in. India is already having its emerging entire ecosystem of information related equipments. We have our satellites, we have our underwater domain awareness. So we have this entire ecosystem coming up. I think what is required when we have very good MDA, the Maritime Domain Awareness from IFC IOR, which is the Information Fusion Center based out of Gurgaon, which looks after entire IOR. I think what we need to do is plug more countries into it, start sharing information. It's just not the equipment selling that will work. It is also the using of those equipments. The training has
Capacity
to be there.
building.
The interoperability should be there. The standard operating procedures has to be harmonized, so that different countries, when they are working together, they should know the language of each other. So I think these are the gradual steps which need to take, and eventually we should be seen more favorably by the rest of the region, at least in a way that we are supporting their territorial integrity and national sovereignty in totem, not just supplying defense weapons. We just not need to be seen as defense suppliers, but we have to be seen as security
active,
providers,
security players.
Yes.
So viewers, China versus Philippines is a microcosm of the state of the world today. There are a lot of revisionist big powers that are trying to grab territory and browbeat smaller countries, and trying to revise the international order in their favor. And in the Indo-Pacific, countries like the Philippines cannot be abandoned, and certainly India is not in favor of the strong trampling over the weak. I want to thank our two guests, Dr. Pooja Bhatt and Dr. Premesha Saha, for being with us. Thank you so much for this enlightening discussion.
Thank you.
And viewers, let's keep our eye on China versus Philippines, because this is a symbol of our times. If we allow a big country to boss over a small one so brazenly, then many more small countries are at risk. And if the entire regional order becomes a Sino-centric one, then India's rise is going to be severely hampered. So we are not prepared to allow this, and let the message go out loud and clear that India stands for rule of law and for freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.
जल्दी टिफिन पैक करो। राजू, मोबाइल छोड़ो।
अरे दीदी वो बैंक का नंबर चाहिए।